have Shautik Biswas, who is the India correspondent and features and analysis editor for the BBC News for its international news site. He has worked in Delhi, London, and Singapore. And now Shautik will be away for one of the most prestigious journalism fellowship, the Neiman Fellowship this summer. Shautik, Shiv Vishwanathan is an Indian public intellectual, and I've had the privilege of seeing him every day, where we sit and conspire on how to bring down several things, not with great success all the time. Of course, most of us know Shiv is a social scientist best known for his contributions to science and technology studies and for his concept of cognitive justice, a term he coined. He is a professor at the Jindal Global Law School here, Center for the Study of Knowledge Systems, and he holds adjunct professorship at the Raman Institute, Research Institute, Bangalore, and the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. And the list goes on of his books and publications, which I shall not go into. And Shubhra Gupta, who I was telling students yesterday, I call Shubhra India's best film critic, without exaggeration. And I'm not very sure, but I think this is one of the rare Fridays that Shubhra is not in Delhi actually reviewing films, but has come out here. So, I mean, really appreciate Shubhra taking time out, and all of you. And to moderate this session, we have Shailja Vajpayee, who has been writing about television and media since 1984. Far too long, in her own words. But she has also watched it change, grow, and grow into what it is today. The elephant in the room and any conversation on any subject. In her case, it would be true to say that you have to pay her to watch television. She gets paid to watch television, and she tears it apart. Shailja, over to you.
Thank you, Kishle, for that very generous introduction to the panel and to me. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real privilege for us all to be here, and thank you for inviting me and all our panelists. I have been spared the necessity of introducing the panel since Kishle has done a far better job of that already. So I thought, let's just get the ball rolling. And what I wanted to do actually was to turn this on its head right at the beginning. Because who is the us and who is the them in all of this in today's world, interconnectivity? Is there, and there are enough us who are divided amongst ourselves in this country and in the world indeed, and the same goes for them. So what do we really mean? Is there really any such binary opposition now? Did it ever exist? And how have we moved and where are we today on this? So I thought perhaps if Professor Vishnu would begin, because I think he's probably the best equipped to take us through this a little. But I do want to say that I would like anyone on the panel to please have their say on every subject and to question anyone else on the panel so that we become very democratic about all of this. Right? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. I guess the irrelevant begin first. I think first thing we'll have to do is to break what I call, for want of a better word, the seriosity of the discussion. Because it becomes an act of breastfeeding. What I want to do is to look at the history of we and they before we come to the current situation. And I just want to take two examples. If you look at the Indian national movement, no national movement was more hospitable to its opponents. No national movement had a greater amount of English eccentrics present. From Alan Octavian Hume to Patrick Geddes. And in fact, I remember Raimundo Panikar once saying, even after India becomes free, we should let all the colonial powers have one city, one little town. So the Danish could have Serampore, the French could have Pondicherry, so India could become a window to the West. We had that confidence. We loved the alien, but I think we also understood him. And in fact, my favorite story is of Nirat Singh Chowdhury, the great All India radio correspondent, who eventually goes to England towards the end of his career. And he comes back and says, I'm so disappointed. The English write terrible English. I think that sense of affiliation, that sense of dialogue is what made it. There's no dualism between we and they. We and they are possibilities of a different kind of dream, of a different kind of personality. I think you can see this even as kids. when we read cricket columns instead of editorial pages. A cricket column was something absolutely cosmopolitan. You could have CLR James, you could have Gurunathan, you could have Yardley, you could have Pingleton. You dreamt of the best. And in that sense, cricket was a cosmopolitan game. If you look at the first years of the national movement, we had the same thing. People like Tito and Castro were folk names in India. Something has changed as we moved from nationalism to the nation state. We've become more insular, more parochial. And I want to take two examples which fascinate me. One, I believe Hartosh also wrote an article on this, is the meeting between Modi and Benjamin Netanyahu. And Netanyahu begins by saying, we are 70 years too late. I wonder whether the Israeli leader ever read Guru Golwalkar, the RSS leader who said, we should treat Muslims in the same way as Hitler treated the Jews. There's an illiteracy here that we have to confront. And one sees this again in the way India plays down its Muslim identity and past. Today, Israel is our twin brother in terrorism while we are fighting the Muslim world, the new axis of evil which we have inherited. In fact, one of the things that fascinated me was the amount of Indians who tried to identify with Americans who were victims of 7/11. I think we have to ask a set of questions here. Can we do a history of we and they as an anthropology, as an exercise of gossip beyond policy? Because I think what happens is we immediately take a set of sides. The digital world, the international world, and we start doing these things. I think the early years of internationalism, we and they was much less, because in a way, the very idea of non-alignment allowed us to drop the we-they distinction. We-they was the problem of the Cold War. Non-alignment would be a movement which you tried to pluralize it. That plurality has been lost today. In fact, in a deep and fundamental way, if you look at it, I mean, you just have to look at the body language of Narendra Modi looking at Ivana Trump. You wonder when colonialism actually ended. I think we have to confront these issues. But I think we also suffer not just from great power rivalry. I think the country we are most envious of is Nepal. In fact, I wrote a wicked article about how India suffers from democratic envy when Nepal became democratic. The amount of hostile reaction was stunning. But we don't ever celebrate a neighbor's ability to liberate himself. The history of we and they has become much more oppositional today as Indians are looking for an identity. And it's an identity confused by one of the most complex, irritating, mischievously illiterate groups, the Indian NRI. I think in a deep and fundamental way, we need a separate page for these guys. I'll stop here because I've been asked to be a prelude. I might come back here.
Thank you, Professor. Annie, taking off from what Professor said, would you agree that be true of the Americans too? That there's a greater sense of being parochial now than, let's say, they were in the 50s and 60s, certainly? And can we now also look from a starting point of what's changed to make that happen? He suggested for us it's a search for our identity, but you come from a far older democracy. So, how do we explain it, if you agree, in the States?
Well, I think that the last election showed exactly how polarized our country has become. I'm from Kansas, which is a red state, a conservative red state in the middle of the country, and I go back there every, twice a year. And I do feel that the people there, a lot of the people, the farmers, people in the lower middle class, say the workers, the tradesmen, they felt very alienated. I mean, before I came to India, I covered wealth and poverty, and there is a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. And there was also a real backlash, I think, against PC-ness in America. I mean, I think there was a lot on social media about the fact that the liberal elite had been sort of governing for 8 years, and what does that mean? And there was a lot of anxiety and about sort of losing traditional values. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that I recall during the campaign was that a lot of them talked about this bathroom debate in North Carolina. So North Carolina had this bathroom debate over whether or not it passed a law actually saying that there had to be specific bathrooms for men, specific bathrooms for women, and it was all about how are we going to welcome transgenders if we're going to. And so there was a lot of backlash against that. And so I think that that you saw that during the election, and it's just deepened even worse now. I mean, there's a sort of a fear of the other, I think.
No, is it because of the political incorrectness of the past? Is that what you feel as journalists?
Well, I think that was one of the driving forces. I mean, I think there was a New York Times, I think, article this week or last week about Chick-fil-A, which is it's a fast food chain. It's owned by Christians.
Yes.
Very Christian. I don't think they're open on Sunday. And there was the whole debate about whether or not that would be welcome in New York City, which is of course a bastion of liberal elite. And I think somebody on social media said, well, this is why Trump won the election, because we are so polarized that we can't even accept the liberal elite, or the can't even accept this sort of this Christian values-driven business in New York City. So I think that was one of the things. There was also obviously the growing inequality, and just a feeling that people feel out of touch, and they.
So this whole we and them is in fact within our country, within our own borders. It's not about how you're looking externally only. It's those divisions have deepened within our countries, nation states.
I mean, for sure, in America, absolutely.
And do you feel that from your reporting now, 4 years in this region, do you feel that too here, that it has increased and deepened here while you've been here?
Well, obviously, intolerance has grown, and I think, I feel like I've seen that in my reporting. I think, I think that there was a Parliament question actually about the rise in religious hatred, and I think that there was data actually recently that supported that idea, and I do think, I think the whole drama over the Padmavat movie was kind of illustrative of sort of how that, it really spiraled out of control, and I realize that there are controversies about movies in India and books and all that, but, the fact that you had, a school bus being stoned in Gurgaon, was really sort of a hallmark, calling hard for, or wake-up call, I guess, for folks about sort of how bad things have gotten here as well.
Professor Vishnath talked about the NRI and the Indian abroad, and as do you think that has, there's been this resurgence of the quest for identity in the NRI, and has that made any difference in ways, let's say, people in America and Britain certainly look at India now because of that community?
Actually, I don't think it's to do with the NRI isolation. One of the things I think that's been happening in South Asia, and I think India has particularly failed its role as kind of the mothership of democracy in this region, is that, how are all these majorities in South Asia, why do they feel like persecuted minorities? Why have they started behaving like persecuted minorities? It's happening in India, it's happening in Sri Lanka, it's happening in Myanmar, it's happening in Pakistan. We see like overwhelming majorities behaving like persecuted minorities, leading to a backlash against the minorities in those countries. So what I think essentially is also the failure of India, because if you look at, for example, how the Indian media covered Nepal after the earthquake, it wasn't there was nothing to feel proud about the way we covered it. And this insularity, I think, has kind of become has crossed borders, and it's essentially also, I also feel is a part of it. And I think one of the reasons could be that, we had a brief flirtation with secularism in the early years after independence, and then we've kind of gravitated towards some ethno-nationalism, which is very different from a nationalism coming out of genuine achievements of a country. And this has led to this strange situation where everybody feels, the majority feels persecuted. And what the NRI is saying, what the majority, affluent majority is saying, more or less equals the same thing. What do you think? It's a difference.
So has that changed the definition for you as you report from this part of the world, not who, because after all, it is in the eyes of the beholder, right? Who is receiving the message, the who and the then, and how they would react to that. So do you find that in your reporting?
Look, the interesting thing is that I work at the BBC, but I'm not come from outside. I'm a local.
Exactly.
So I see both sides in a sense. Every time I do a piece which is critical of the government or is not very complimentary about India, they either kind of, there are lots and lots of NRIs who write in. There was this big campaign which included one MPs, which actually sent out a letter to the BBC board that they should sack me because I was a colonial coolie or something, doing the bidding of the Brits. The fact is that I have complete independence to do what I want to do and nobody's telling me what to do in the BBC. So I see a lot of that hostility coming from the outside because we go to a wider audience globally, and when they read all this sitting in California or London or wherever they are, they kind of, it doesn't kind of square up with the things that they're telling people there in the community that there is really great nation or whatever, and solve most of our problems, etc., etc. I don't know what they say, but the reaction is completely disproportionate and it's abusive. It doesn't befit somebody who's obviously studied and gone abroad and is working for maybe a technology company, Silicon Valley or whatever. That's completely, you can't really match the person with the rhetoric and the bio that they so that is a problem. And a lot of that flack is actually coming from outside.
I just want to say, can I just add to that? When we post a story here in India that people that is maybe unfavorable to the government, we do get a lot of backlash immediately. But then there's a second cycle of backlash when the NRIs wake up, and so it kind of goes to the evening, and then even way late into the evening because then you have the Silicon Valley NRIs waking up. And so it's
So
kind
it
of
goes on
interesting.
throughout the day.
There's sort of two phases of the abuse: the first wave and then the second wave.
Shubhra, so do you notice this, Professor Vishwanathan said earlier, it seemed less, we seem more accepting of our conquerors or whoever came. And then, did our films and culturally, did we that reflected in that earlier period? And have you noticed any major shift in that respect? So when I ask you we and them, what comes to mind for you?
Hi everyone, I've been thinking about this topic for the last few days. Ever since I actually realized that I might just be able to be here because 2 films out of the 4 films that I was due to see this week were cancelled. Till Wednesday I was like, I'm not going to be here.
Thank the producers.
I don't need to grapple with this, but since Wednesday evening I've been thinking of this, about how we see them and how they see us, and really who is this they and who is this we. There are 5 of us sitting on this panel, and for this moment we are a we and you are a you, sitting across. So if you flip it around, from your perspective, it's just the other way around. You become the them and you're the you. So it all depends upon, I think, where your perspective is and where you are at that point of time. As a long-time film critic who's been looking at film, and for many years I used to write on television as well, with years together. In fact, I started writing on TV when there was Doordarshan was the only active town. Yeah, that was many years ago, and I found television on those days, I find much more rewarding than it is today, when there are like 1,000 channels and not one single channel has an identity or something that differentiates from something else. They're all the same. And the thing with differentiators is it immediately transforms us into us and them, right? The moment I see something different, that becomes to me a differentiator in something I'm watching, and that to me becomes something that I want to keep watching. Somebody from across the road can say, no, I don't like that, and immediately there's a binary. So, but the interesting thing about binaries are, I'm actually loud enough and I think I can do it. Okay. The thing about binaries is that they are never permanent, they are constantly shifting. I think that's part of the challenge and the interest of where we are and where anyone is particularly when you're watching something, you you and I could be watching the same film, but we could have completely, radically different reactions to it. And that also becomes a kind of identity. So what interests me about watching and then reporting on it or writing on it and critiquing it is the way popular culture makes sense of our world and how we make sense of our world through that and what mediates whom. I can be watching a film and that film at that point is watching me.
Yeah.
So there is a symbiotic connection that we have between people, between the us's and the them's, and it's always shifting.
There's it's a contradiction, isn't it? That in fact the modes of communication have multiplied, increased, access is greater. All of that seems to happen. I can access anything from any part of the world. Streaming allows me to watch films from anywhere, TV, and yet we're arguing at a level that is we're more parochial. Would you like to shed some light on why? What is
No, I wouldn't get that desperate.
Okay.
I think it's the way you think of categories. When I was talking about it, I was thinking of my favorite film star, Dharmendra.
Yeah.
One day in an article in Filmfare, he said, when I'm homesick, I go to Birmingham. I think in a way it brings to do with yourself. And I think that is something that you have yourself hinted in many columns. That the binary is porous and the binary can be reinvented again and again.
Yes.
And I think that is the possibility. See, I think India's always had two models. One was the center-periphery model, which was colonial, and the white man was doomed.
Yeah.
But then there's the front-yard-backyard model, which was more gossipy. We could domesticate the English. We did a fabulous job. We'll domesticate the Americans also. I think we have to allow for that possibility.
Yeah.
But that needs a different kind of folklore.
I was wondering whether the fact that we so many in India, at least the so-called elite class, speak English, has been one of the reasons that for us these divisions have been different than, let's say, for other countries.
No, it's what we did with English. I think that made the difference. As some of the African authors said, we'll make English say what the English cannot say. And I think that was the beauty of it. I think there was a confidence of a different kind. It was not just inferiority. There was also an attempt to say, we can translate, we can domesticate. And it's not technology, it's the categories we can use.
Okay, if we can just shift focus to a more practical level rather than, let's say, metaphysical in a sense. Annie, I think the thing we have to look at it, we are just accept in a very practical manner this business of we and them in terms of media experience. And, traditionally, the biggest enemy when we were growing up was the BBC. I mean, that's the obvious way. We used to listen to BBC radio, and everyone in India got very hot under the collar because, they had said something that we thought was, shaming India. So, of course, we loved to hate the BBC. We couldn't do without it because it was our earphone to the world, but we hated it. And so was radio. But now when you come to the report on India, how do you approach trying to report on us for them? And do you do it consciously in this manner of thinking, okay, this is what will work for my audience, because obviously that becomes the most important thing in our case. And so when you come to India, a little bit about how do you approach getting to know India? Was it through films? Was it through talking to people? And then when you arrived here, if you can take us through the kind of stories you felt you had to tell. Because some of you read today, the Bombay High Court judge has said the kind of stories, the image of India is only about crime and rape. So, did you come with that kind of background? Can you take us through, and then talking obviously as an Indian reporter on India, but for not only the Indian audience, but foreign one?
Well, when I was appointed in 2013, I was told under no certain terms, should I be writing about monkeys or cows or anything, people kissing in Lodi Gardens. So there were all, there's been a long trail of foreign correspondents who've come here and done, these types of stories, and they've been ridiculed. I was looking today, actually, I think Quartz actually has a running blog of all the terrible stories that the New York Times has written about monkeys over the years. So there were certain topics that I was, that I tried to, obviously, that I wanted to avoid. And I was lucky because my second at the time was Rama Lakshmi, who's a wonderful journalist, and she had been here with the Post for 25 years. She's now with print. Shekhar Gupta stole her away from us, very sadly. But she was kind of my conscience, and I listened very carefully to what she had to say because I did not want to fall into those traps of writing these sort of tropey kind of things that offend people. And I mean, I think, when you're coming in from a foreign country, everybody seems to notice the same things, but you shouldn't actually be writing about them, right? I mean, of course obviously you see things that others have seen before you, but to then sort of write about them is probably not the best. But so I was saved by Rama. I mean, I would say to her, oh, well, so the stringer in Tamil Nadu is recommending a village where people are donating their kidneys for money, and she would just look at me and she'd be like, no. So I had a conscience there, and I was lucky in that regard. But I do think that that there's an issue with foreign correspondents coming, and especially, I'm sorry to say this, but men who don't listen to their staff, who don't listen to their Indian colleagues. I mean, if I was in a knot of Indian journalists at the FCC or the Indian Press Club, and they were talking about UP, I would just sit there silently and don't say a word, because nobody cares what I think about UP politics, right? And and I can learn more by being quiet than holding forth. But so I think there's a tendency among others who have gone before me not to do enough listening. So I think that's a trap that foreign correspondents fall into.
But the image that you portray of India, and I know it's not in any way homogeneous, obviously. But is it changed in the sense that, now does it reflect crime and rape and all the negativity of India? Or has that been balanced out by the success stories? Obviously, the IT industry was the big story in one way. But do you go beyond that to look? And how does that work for you? The whole stereotype of the Indian you're saying you avoid. So what do you look for to tell them?
Well, I mean, I think it's really challenging, especially now that we can look at our analytics. We can see on our desktop at the same time that it's posted. I mean, there's in our new newsroom in Washington, D.C., we have a huge floor-to-ceiling wall that shows us who's reading what story in real time.
Yes.
So it's much more difficult now. I think that we've seen a change actually just since I've been here since 2013. I mean, I think when I first came, there was a ton of interest in Modi, and we used to write things about Modi during the campaign, and they would get hundreds and thousands of hits. And now it's sort of fallen off actually. I don't know if you've seen that at the BBC actually. So and then of course the Trump phenomenon came. So we as South Asia correspondents were struggling to get India into the paper. Where I mean, the example that I like to give about that is when this is not India, but Nawaz Sharif was deposed from power last summer.
Yes.
We didn't even have it on our front page. So with the Trump phenomenon, I think the South Asia stories generally, the India stories are struggling for air. So I think that's
so in a sense, domestic news has.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Trump story is really taking over all media. And the other challenge that we have, of course, is stories that we think we need to do might not get a good audience, but then you have a sort of for example, the example that I always like to give is that I wrote a story. I thought it was really amazing to have gone into trawl right after Burhan Wani was killed in 2016 in Kashmir. And I mean, literally 200, I'm not joking, 246 people read that story. Whereas I wrote a silly blog about Nita Ambani getting Z category security from the government, and it was 500,000 people. So we also have run into that problem, which is that sometimes the things that people in the West want to read about India are not necessarily the things that they ought to be reading, or B, the things that we're giving them I also think that, Indian politics is always a difficult, aside from national politics, I think state politics, which consumes us, right? We were obsessed with Jalalita when she was alive, we're now obsessed with Yogi Adityanath, for example, but it barely registers outside of India, I think at the state level. When I was home, I went home for an office visit in December, and we did some Google, we were looking at some Google Analytics on searches for Yogi, and there was literally not one outside. There was maybe 99.9% of the Google searches for that name were inside India.
Right.
So it shows you sort of like what, kind of what we're up against in terms of, the audience and what people outside of India are actually wanting to read.
So I think you reflect on this as a, someone from India reporting on India, but for an audience abroad also.
I've had a fairly interesting and mixed experience. A lot of the stories that have done well from India, of course, apart from, you write the news cycle, like this, incident like a rape, which happened in Kashmir. It wrote the news cycle and did well. But apart from that, what does really well, we find with foreign audiences is some kind of a contrarian spin on something which you take for granted. Like, for example, there's this kind of notion, for example, that India is a vegetarian nation, for example. Now, if you actually, I did a piece on why it is not, and based on some very new research, very interesting research that has come out, and how people are under-reporting eating beef, over-reporting eating vegetarian food in certain parts of the country. That did really well across continents. We saw, I did a piece, I remember, of one of the largest reasons why women die in this country is, if you look at the figures, the external figures, a phenomenal number, like 55, 60, 70,000 women are killed in burning incidents. Either they set themselves on fire or they catch fire. And it's kind of unexplained, which is what. So I went into that figure and spoke to a lot of people, and but such a huge number of Indian women actually died in burning incidents. Really well. So a lot of that does well. The other part that does well, I think, is a really well-written story. It could be on anything like even in this kind of very busy news cycle, I just went and there was this very small story which happened in a Bulldogs in Orissa. This is very surprising. It will just give you an example of how difficult it is to read our audiences. It was about a young couple which got married. The groom was a software engineer with Toshiba in Bangalore. Very small town in a remote part of Orissa. Gets a gift parcel on his wedding day, 3 days after his wedding. Takes it to his kitchen, opens the parcel, it blows up, and he's killed. He's killed, and his grandaunt is killed, and his wife is previously injured, she survives. So nobody knows what happens. And so I just thought, I had this small remote town in India, this software engineer gets a wedding gift. I thought there was a story, I went there. And I kind of pieced together what could have happened, still haven't found who did it. And this simple whodunit story from a kind of part of India where I kind of said that this had led to a lot of mistrust in the town and a lot of rumors and innuendos about the girl's family and the boy's family and how it's divided society and blah, blah, blah. And it did really well across the world. So I think it's very difficult to say sometimes. We still kind of, sometimes things we think will do well, will go down well with the audiences, won't go down well. Sometimes things you write on a whim, becomes very popular. So, in the digital world, readers are very good experts. It's not very easy to find out what kind of things they like most.
Professor Krishna, what do you think? You read a lot of things from all the media abroad, etc. Have you, in your opinion, has it changed the way we are being reflected abroad? Do you feel that, or is it?
No. I think India sounds more interesting outside America. When I talk to Brazilians and Africans, I think I'd hear more interesting surprises. And maybe because I spend more time in these places.
Right.
So when you have an encounter with the South Africans,
Yes.
you get a different kind of picture.
Right.
But I think in a way, when we go to England and America, we follow a stereotype.
Yes.
And I think we have to break it now. Because the opportunities we got for reinventing ourselves across, I think gave us a different kind of picture. I think we have to do it for England and America.
But is
Because
it
it's
that
almost
the
textbook
stereotypes, we also look at them in terms of stereotypes? Would you?
No, I think in some ways, let me put it this way.
Yeah.
The elite is boring. The ordinary villager is quite cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
I think he's much more open. He might be more illiterate,
Right.
but there's a sense of hospitality about him,
Yeah.
which gives him a different kind of openness.
Right.
So he might say something low level in Bengali or Hindi, but there's a greater openness than the kind of constraints within which the elite operates. The elite is almost repressed about these countries, and even more about China today.
Yes. Shubhra, any thoughts on this? Of how you, because obviously you also interact with a lot of journalists, you meet ones, you go to festivals abroad. Is the way they look at us changing, apart from the films, but just in general in the conversation around India? Do you feel that it has changed in any way?
Okay, so I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about how post-liberalization in 1993, when India became a different country, or it sort of started on its road to become the country that it became till 2014, let's say. There was something quite momentous happened because we got television opened up in a way that our worlds opened up to the possibilities of what we used to only get in pirated DVDs at that point, or not DVDs, VHS copies at that point in time.
And we saw the Iraq War.
And we saw the Iraq War, and everything post that suddenly became different. So it was not just about what we used to get in. The Hindi film industry also got out of India. It went out. It was a two-way thing because things came in. We saw something like The Bold and the Beautiful for the very first time in our lives.
Yeah.
Something that had been running in the US for like some 20 years. And suddenly we saw the kind of things happening between men and women that we had never seen before.
And then something like MTV and what we did in create Channel V.
Channel V, all of those things.
I mean, I don't think you all are of a generation that know about Channel V. Does anyone here know? No, I think it would be good if you explain a little about what
happened?
Where the we and the they came together.
The we and the they. Alright, so this is a generational we and they. What happened around that time when liberalization actually helped TV channels to become from one channel which was state-owned and it went across the country. Suddenly there was a possibility of private channels coming into existence and showing us shows which were not all about coming from a government perspective or from a place where they would be showing you what is good for you, what is not good for you, those kind of things, or things where educational values were thrust down our throats. Suddenly entertainment became the big mantra. And television actually opened up our worlds in ways really we hadn't seen before. And I think what happened then was, because of this back and forth, cinema suddenly became something that people outside your dreaded NRIs that could access, and people from the big film generational, the third generation people who had gone to Cornell, to Stanford to study and to do an MBA, came back and they started making films for NRIs.
Right.
Alright, so those films that were created for the specific purposes of nostalgia nerds outside of the country saw an India that their forefathers had seen.
And is that why we always had to look at foreign locales?
Yeah, so then from Yash Chopra's tulips, from the Holland tulips that he showed, where people, so heroes and heroines sang and danced. Suddenly, the whole thing about romancing outside of the country became more Switzerland, more town, not only rolling down mountainsides.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think us and them kind of syndrome,
Yeah.
but there is really no us and them because they also live on the same planet. Alright? Just that they happen to inhabit the planet which makes.
No, but to be more
them us.
specific, do we see in their films a change in the way they treat Indians?
You're talking about film from outside the
Yes,
country?
yes, yes.
They're not
Is there any, I mean, Peter Sellers.
Oh, that was really in the 70s.
No, so what has changed then? If you
So,
can, if
okay,
you
so
can.
let me put it this
How
way.
easier.
We are still making films which are taking their way outside, taking their time getting outside in non-NRI pockets.
Yes.
It's it's happening now. Otherwise, the films were specifically meant to go to either South Hall or Jackson Heights or places where Indians congregated.
Right.
Now, in the last 10 years, after a few movies, after a few people who are making films which are not so heavy on songs and dances, which are not so heavy on the tropes that we've always existed on, they're getting slightly untropy, as Annie put it. I like that word. So, to get into a story which can travel, a story which has legs, characters you can actually,
Yeah.
you can empathize with, or they resonate with you. That's been happening in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
And now when I travel outside,
Yeah.
I don't really get this, oh, you guys who only make songs and dances.
Right.
I also get, I saw Lunchbox, I saw Gangs of Wasseypur, I saw, a few other films that have come in the last few years. And suddenly people outside are looking at a different India. And it's not just Indian films. People like Nagaraj Manjule,
That's
the
right.
Marathi director
Yeah.
who made a film called Sairat, or made a film called Pantry, both
Right.
of which got massive openings at the Berlinale, or people who watched, I remember watching Gangs of Wasseypur, which is a 6.5-hour film
Yeah.
at the director's fortnight in Cannes.
Right.
And it was everyone, I remember one cast member coming and saying, do you have a biscuit? I am dying of hunger because it was raining, no one could go out and grab a sandwich. People just sat there and watched that film. And it was like a standing ovation for the very first time in many, many years that an Indian film actually got a standing ovation.
Yeah.
So I think the change is happening,
Yes.
but it's also very slow. It's also very slow and also reflects the kind of reality that most of us don't realize is that all cinema making activity needs to make the money.
Yes.
Otherwise it doesn't. There's no altruism happening in that side of the
Yeah.
countryside. Everyone wants to make
The Big Sick,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I think it was one film perhaps where we may agree someone from this part of the world looked like someone believable to us. In a sense, what would you have to say about that? About how, these characters from India or this part
Okay,
of
so
the world?
South Asian, yeah. So anybody here, I'm sure a lot of people here seen the Big Sick.
Most
Yeah?
people seen it? Yeah.
Anybody?
Everyone seen it?
Raise your hand.
Lot of
Okay,
people
some-
see it?
Some people
Oh,
have
no.
seen it.
Okay.
It's a Pakistani stand-up comic who actually makes a movie about his own life, where he sort of fictionalizes it, and it's very interesting
Right.
because he was up for an Oscar
Yeah.
this earlier this year. So the movie actually traveled.
Yeah.
It didn't just stay in the pockets for the people of color. There were white people
Yes.
also watched it and said ha ha. So which was really nice because a lot of the times this conversation doesn't happen. We all live in silos. We talk like this.
No,
or
so
we
we
talk
moved
as
from
each other.
Slumdog Millionaire.
I think Slumdog, I must be the one few people in the world who think Slumdog Millionaire was actually quite wonderful. Because
Yes, I'm just asking the kind of India that it I mean, that's what I'm asking.
It was based on a book that an Indian diplomat had written.
Sure.
Right? Most people just forget that actually it was
Yeah.
Vikas Swarup's book
That's right.
that Danny Boyle optioned and